things that is absolutely incredible is to hear that same position that folks won't tolerate either civil disobedience, or folks won't tolerate the presence of folks who are trying to stand up for their rights. And the Mall of America and the city of Bloomington, I would ironically put in those same categories as those people who stood in the South and declared that segregation was not something that they wanted to have happen in their communities, right? So what I'm not saying is that the Mall of America or the city of Bloomington are separatists and want to secede from the Union and aren't folks who value diversity. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that it is very ironic that the same night that the city council honors Dr. Martin Luther King and gives a city proclamation, that the Human Rights Department of the city of Bloomington accepts this proclamation on behalf of Dr. King. At that same meeting, there sits the city attorney, willing and ready to press charges against folks who stood up in the face of injustice and said, we want to let our voices be heard, let our voices be known. Now, it is true that civil disobedience has its consequences. As we've read in the letter from a Birmingham jail, it's obvious that Dr. King was willing to pay that price. And I would submit that the people who were protesters and quasi organizers of that demonstration at the Mall of America are willing and were willing to pay that price. However, I think it's very interesting that sometimes we make choices that we have the right to make, but are they the right choices to make? And so when I think about that particular decision, and I look at Dr. King's legacy, and I look at the letter from a Birmingham jail, unfortunately, I don't know who the attorneys were that, or who there's no mention in history, particularly in popular history. There's no mention of that city attorney or that county attorney who made the decision to prosecute Dr. King. For some reason, I'm not sure why, but they seem to have gotten lost in history. And so oftentimes we get caught up in doing the right thing, but we're doing things right, but we don't necessarily do the right thing. And so I ask myself on a regular basis as I go through life, what side of history do I want to be on? What side of history will I be on? Will I be remembered for the good things that I've done, or will I be washed away in history because I followed along with other things that were happening? And people also question, particularly at the Mall of America, is it appropriate to protest on private property? And I would suggest that it is only American to protest on private property. The Boston Tea Party happened in a private harbor that demonstrated the injustices of that time. The sit-ins at the Woolworth counters made it possible for people to do interstate travel and be able to have accommodations. Those little small acts created the atmosphere by which people were able to recognize and deal with the need for change. And so, yeah, I would say that they're not in the wrong. I will say that they were willing to pay the consequences, but I'm wondering, are people willing to be the ones in history to be on the wrong side? And so as we think about that, we also have to think about what it means to move. Oftentimes, Dr. King talked about, particularly in this letter from a Birmingham jail, and I'm not sure why I'm hanging on this, but the letter from a Birmingham jail, he was very upset with what he termed the white moderates. And the white moderates were all those individuals who were Christian like him, who were preaching in their church about the values of going to heaven and how we get to heaven, but were not able to support him and support the movement because they thought it was an uncomfortable thing, and that time would create those opportunities, and that Dr. King and those troublemakers were forcing this stuff. And what I would say is that when you are in the dominant group and you don't feel the boot of oppression, you have time. When folks are in a position of oppression, when folks are poor, when folks are undereducated, and there's a system that continually keeps the perpetuation of these things going, then that group has a right to cry out and a right to say we're not willing to take this any longer. And Paulo Freire would suggest that it is only the oppressed group that can actually free or liberate the majority group, because it is not in the majority group's best interest to do so until they are compelled to deal with a reality that they've not had to consider before. And so as you think on these things and you go through the rest of this newsletter, be critical in your thinking, be critical in your actions, be critical in your response to the world.